A histogram is a really nice way to show people the results of a study or some measurements because it'll instantly let people see what was the most common number in a study or what was the smallest number in a study. It lets people make their own decision almost instantly when they look at the graph. So let me show you with an example on the left how to make a histogram, and then I'll get you to practice making a histogram on your own, and I'll show you the solution on the right. Let's go ahead and have a look at our first study. The heights of students in two high school classes were measured in centimeters. The results were grouped into a frequency table, and the frequency table looks like this. You can see it's been grouped in tens in the height column, and we have our frequencies on the right. So, for example, 3 people were measured to be between 120 and 129 centimeters. And the question asks us, well, display the data in a histogram, so it's a lot easier to look at. We can make conclusions quickly. So like any other graph that you'd set up, the first thing you have to do is sort of build the X and Y axes. Let's do that now. There we go. There's our horizontal, or our X axis, and our vertical, or Y axis. Now on a histogram, the frequency will always go on the Y axis. So whatever else we're measuring, in this case it's height in centimeters, will go along the X axis. The other important point to note is that in a histogram, the X axis has to be divided into exactly equal segments. Well, it looks like we've already had that set up for us in our frequency table. You can see that the heights have been grouped in tens. So let's record each interval on the X axis. We'll start at 120 and we'll go up by 10 each time. So the next one will be 130. Then 140, and I'm trying to keep the dashes equally spaced as best as possible. And then 150 and 160 and so on until we've gone all the way up to, we'll go from 190 all the way up to 200. Next, we need a title for our axis, just like always. And in this case, we're just measuring the heights of students. And our units, that's important too, is centimeters. All right, now that the x-axis has been set up, let's do the same for the y-axis. What intervals should we use for the y-axis? How am I going to split that up? Well, the smallest value I have is 2, and the largest I have is 17, and there's some 3s, 6s, and 8s. So I could probably get away with dividing this into groups of 2. So I think I'll do that. So the first dash I'll call 2, then 4, and 6, and so on. There we go, all the way up to 18. Now typically on the y-axis we would say, for a title, frequency. I'm running out of room here, I'm just going to say F. But on paper, go ahead and put frequency for your y-axis just to show people that's what it's all about. Okay, now the axes are taken care of. Now we have to get to the fun part. A histogram is all about drawing some bars. Looks a lot like a bar graph. So let me show you how you do that. For our first interval, between 120 and 130, what's the frequency? Well, looking at my table, looks like it's 3. So 3 people are between 120 and 129 centimeters tall. So I draw a bar that goes up to where 3 would be on the y-axis. And then I just continue doing that. So the next interval is also 3, between 130 and 139. The next interval looks like there's a smaller frequency, it's 2. So I'll just go up to 2 on the y-axis over here. And 150 to 159 will be an interval of, or frequency of 8. That's about 8 right there. Next we have 6. Now of course you don't have the luxury of just drawing rectangles that are nicely colored like I'm doing on your paper, but just to give you an idea of what you'd be drawing on paper. You could just draw blank rectangles and then shade them in with a different color later. Between 180 and 189, that's our largest bar. It goes all the way up right here to 17. And finally, our last one goes way back down to 3. And you can see the advantage of doing a histogram right off the bat. When somebody looks at this, all they have to do is read, well, what's the tallest bar? And that tells me what's the most common interval. So I know right off the bat that more people are between 180 and 189 centimeters tall than anywhere else in the class, any other interval. Last, to finish off the graph, we'll just add a little title right here. Height of students. And there you go. There's your first histogram. Okay, you ready to try making your own histogram? Here is your example problem to try. The number of chicken wings eaten by customers at a restaurant were counted. The results were grouped into a frequency table, and the frequency table looks like this. You can see that 2 people ate between 0 and 9 wings, and 8 people ate between 10 and 19 wings, and so on. And the question asks, display the data in a histogram. All right, so try that one out, making your own histogram on paper, and when you're ready, I'll show you what the answer looks like. And here is your histogram. You should get a shape that looks like this, rises and falls, and between 20 and 30, there's the most amount of wings eaten at 24. And don't forget your title, and titles for the axes. And for this graph, we chose an interval of going up by 3. You might have had something different. And make sure your intervals all look pretty even. There is a histogram.